So I think we're ready to get started. So welcome again. I'm Zakiya Thomas. I am the new incoming CEO and president of the ERA Coalition and the Fund for Women's Equality. Thank you so much for joining us for our June Town Hall discussion on youth engagement and voting. This Town Hall series is funded in part by the Harnish Foundation and will continue throughout the year to bring you topics of interest intersecting with our work on the ERA. Some quick housekeeping before we get started. You're welcome to share your thoughts in the chat box, but please put any questions you have for the speakers in the QA box so our comms director, Chrissy, can read them out during our question and answer period. For those of you who would like closed captioning, you can turn that option on through Zoom features at the bottom of your screen. And for those of you who are joining us directly via Eventbrite, if you are having sound issues, you can click through Zoom to participate there or join us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and also TikTok to watch the live feed. We'll put those links in the chat for you. And now on to our discussion for today, which will be led by Kimberly Peeler-Allen, ERA Coalition Board Chair and co-founder of Higher Heights. Kimberly's expertise as a political consultant will be helpful in this town hall as we speak to some younger people doing the work of engaging new and existing voters from our youngest generation. Over to you, Kimberly.
Thank you so much, Zakiya, and welcome to your first town hall.
Thank you.
It is a great pleasure to be here with all of you for this exciting discussion on youth engagement and voting. As we look toward the critical midterm elections, we know that voter outreach is going to be crucial for the issue of equality this year. That's why we're taking today to talk to some youth-led organizations doing the work on the ground. We're grateful for them to take their time to be with us today, lend their expertise and their insights on the issues that young voters care about and how to plan to message around those priorities. And now let's meet our panelists. Victoria Hammett is the Deputy Executive Director of Gen Z for Change, which is a nonprofit organization that utilizes social media to make a positive impact. She is also a TikToker herself and posts content about political advocacy, current events, and social justice. Welcome, Victoria. Cassie Rubio is a queer Latinx organizer, educator, and writer based in Los Angeles, California. They are the co-chair of the Feminist Front, an intersectional gender justice organization uniting youth to build greater feminist futures in their communities through political education, grassroots organizing, and healing arts. Welcome, Cassie. Julia Squitteri is the founder and executive director of the Ruth Project, a gender equity advocacy organization fighting to train youth how to rectify gender inequities in Ruth Bader Ginsburg's name. She is also a researcher who is currently working with the ACLU and specializes in Title IX, dress code reform, gender-based violence, feminist history, and self-advocacy training. Welcome. And Ritwik Tati is a rising sophomore at Stanford University, originally from Haddon Heights, New Jersey. He is the organizing director for Generation Ratify, the youth-led movement to pass the Equal Rights Amendment. Ritwik first delved into grassroots organizing while pushing against the Penn East pipeline in New Jersey. Welcome to all of you. So let's just dive right in and give our audience an opportunity to learn a little bit about more about your organizations and your work and how it intersects with voting and equality. So how do groups like yours reach young voters and talk to them about the issues in a captivating way? So I'll throw it open to the floor, whoever wants to start.
Yeah, so Gen Z for Change, the organization that I'm a part of, utilizes social media, like it was said, in order to reach young people. And basically, when we were first getting started, it was a group of a lot of TikTok creators and influencers, people who you wouldn't typically see in a political or advocacy space, rallying together to get kids out to vote. And so after the 2020 election, we've continued the same work, getting young people civically engaged using what young people use most, which is social media.
Excellent. Cassie, you want to share a little bit about your work and how you've been mobilizing and speaking to your constituents?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Cassie, she, they pronouns. As co-chair of the Feminist Front, we have been working very hard around youth engagement, specifically around voter registration. And so something I could speak more specifically to actually was in the 2020 election, we launched our Electoral Justice Now project, which really called folks to come into the voting justice space around issue-based organizing. And so a lot of the work we were doing was around voter suppression, getting BIPOC, rural communities, lower income folks registered to vote. And so with partnerships we created with other state electoral justice organizations across the country, we were actually able to get over 500,000 voters of color registered, which was a huge, huge victory for such an important election of our lifetime. And it's definitely the type of work we're going to continue doing as we move into midterms.
Bravo, bravo. Ritwik, how have you gotten young people to care about the Equal Rights Amendment?
Yeah, definitely. In terms of our social media, our presence consists of informational posts and amplifying the work that local organizers do, as well as posts that welcome in new organizers. And we really try to periodically post ways for more inactive organizers to get involved more deeply if they wish to. I know when I first got involved with GR, I had very little knowledge of the ERA. Obviously, the fight has been going on for over a century, and there are ways that we can get young people involved and really try to change the messaging for this generation. And being personable has been so important in our organizing, and showing the impact that folks are having in their communities is really important because these new organizers can feel that our goals are achievable.
Excellent, excellent. And Julia, in your work with Ruth Project, how have you been able to mobilize and really speak to young people to get them to really, how to fight for gender justice?
Yeah, so a lot of our work is really focused on empowerment. And so the model we use believes that if we're going to elevate young people's voices, not just in the electoral space, but in the social justice space in general, we have to first show them the impact they can make. And so we've worked with a lot of young people as young as 13 in some cases, where they're coming to us with very little background in social justice, and some of them don't have the optimism. And so what we really try to do is empower them and show them, here's what you can do to change the things around you that are cases of gender inequity. And so really teaching them is our biggest part of how we're elevating young people, is giving them the tools to be capable self-advocates, because we have to be taught those, and that comes with motivation and empowerment.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's one thing to recognize the injustice, and it's another thing to understand how you can combat it and reverse course. And I think that this goes right into kind of my next question, is around relational organizing. We know that you can't just go and ask somebody to go out and vote. Like, what is the value proposition? How are each of you approaching that with the people that you're working with, in this day and age when folks are just saying, politics is dead and it doesn't have any value, when politicians aren't listening, why should I vote? How are you engaging in relationship organizing or relational organizing to get people to the polls and get them to engage in the issues? I'll go the opposite way around. Julia.
Okay, sounds good. With relational organizing, one thing that I always love to say is, give me one issue you care about, and start with that. So one thing that's really big, especially with a lot of young people, is climate change. So sometimes we'll start there, start with the facts, start with the data, and especially as people who are growing up going through school through COVID, it's really challenging for a lot of people to see the impact of their work. And so we really want to fight some of that dejected perspectives that we're seeing in the wake of COVID and in the wake of this really attack on civil rights all around. And so with relational organizing, always start with an issue that someone really cares about and work backwards from there. I think that, of course, if you go up to someone and say, hi, will you vote for this candidate? I mean, maybe they'll vote, but the majority of the time, you really have to give someone a reason, and to get people, especially young people who might be cynical, to get them to a place where they really believe in the power of their vote, you have to show them, here's what can happen. Here's this issue you care about. Well, if you vote for A, B, and C, and if we get this amount of people into the Senate or the House, this is what can happen. And then this policy can do this. I think it's really illustrating the chain reaction of a vote. And so with relational organizing, I always love to start with one thing that deeply matters to someone, because it's all tied together, especially when we're talking about political organizing.
Victoria, thoughts? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Cassie. I was just calling on folks, but go ahead.
Sorry. Okay, awesome. Yeah, I was just going to actually build off of Julia's great point. So something that we were doing with our Electoral Justice Now project, and we continue to do with the Feminist Front, is really try and cultivate this community building piece, because that is so vital. I think what we saw in the 2020 election during the pandemic was how isolated all of these young people were, right? We were confined to our homes, we were separated from one another, and because of that isolation, you know, the cynicism can start happening, the apathy can start happening. And so something that we really tried to foster was even a digital community and presence together. And so when we would be hosting these text bankings or phone bankings with our state electoral justice partners, we would actually kind of make it a party online. And so we would all be on Zoom together, we'd be playing our music, even if we were in our PJs, you know, and so we would, you know, be hopping on and off the phones, messaging each other, amping each other up. And it's that also one-to-one relational organizing that I felt really sustained our work through multiple months of this campaign. And I feel like by the end of every text or phone banking session, we could actually see the amount of folks in real time that we had contacted all together. And seeing that direct impact immediately, I think, was very important for people to be able to witness and feel like they took a ownership of, because, you know, just going to the ballot box itself and casting your vote, that's an individual process, right? You're doing that alone, but actually getting people involved in the voter registration piece is something we can do together. And so that was just something really awesome that we were able to see in the 2020 election that was really successful and we hope to replicate.
Love it. Others?
Yeah, I was just going to say, in terms of combating cynicism, I feel like it is incredibly important to acknowledge the cynicism and its validity, because a lot of young people are frustrated when they're told, after, you know, being disappointed repeatedly, to just vote harder and then things will really change. And so I think acknowledging that those emotions before reminding young people the importance of voting, especially in primaries and in local elections, and the different ways that young people can get civically engaged without voting, you know, calling representatives, all of those different things, I think are really, really important to remind young people of.
Yeah, and just jumping off of that, at GR, we emphasize that folks who want to engage in relational organizing need to have their personal narrative down pat, and your personal narrative is almost like an elevator pitch of sorts, and you begin with a specific way that the issues being worked on have affected you or others personally. And, you know, your narrative has to be relatable, but you don't need to rely on the fact that the person you're talking to has gone through the same experience. Talking about the work that's already been done and the victories that have been made is great for this type of organizing as well. You always want to give folks a sense of hope and a sense of purpose, so they can see that their work is having an impact. And like we've been discussing, it's always a bit frustrating that groups will come forth with Go Vote as like their only messaging to call people to action. So we really try to emphasize intentional messaging and intentional conversations in any of the work that we do. And ultimately, it's about building trust through shared stories.
Mhm. Yeah, storytelling is so critically important to being able to move, because you have to draw in those emotions to get people to act. One of the reasons that we wanted to have this particular panel was the importance of breaking down the silos. And it's not just like, oh, well, this is so we can see what the young people are doing. No, we need to break down the silos and work collaboratively across the board. And I think many of the things that you all have shared already, particularly around how do you combat cynicism, are things that can be translated across the electoral population across the board. And we are in very challenging times, and there are people who have been engaged in the electoral process all their lives who are saying, you know what, if I've been doing this all my life and it hasn't worked, why should I continue? And I think drawing on your experience and your advice, I think, is really, really important. What are other reasons or ways that we can break down the silos and really be able to continue to build? And why is that important to you and your organization in collaborating across sectors, across identities, across geographies, across ages? Why is that important to you, and how do you see that as moving the needle forward for your work?
Yeah, I can get started. So GR's inception has actually been kind of a defiance of what the feminist movement has been for the past few decades. We really sought to bring in young BIPOC folks and bring forth underrepresented perspectives, since that space hasn't always been available. And we've really tried to emphasize that the fight for the ERA is a fight for all. It's a movement for queer folks, folks across the gender spectrum, and gender non-conforming folks. And as a group led by young people, we do have to rely on the resources that our amazing partners have offered us through our growth. And a group like ERA Coalition has been great at equipping us with these resources, and also collaborating with other youth-led groups has been valuable in breaking down these silos and bringing this new generation into the movement. A while ago, we ran a webinar series called A Seat at the Table, which was really focused on centering the work that BIPOC folks in the movement do, as well as the more unknown career paths that organizers take to continue their work. So we had a human rights lawyer named Kate Kelly come speak, who I'm sure a few of you are familiar with, and she does really amazing work that people are not really familiar with in continuing with this gender equality work, on the law level.
Others, what are thoughts on breaking down silos?
Well, I was just gonna jump in and say, when it comes to breaking down silos, I think that Ritwik did a great job of talking about a lot of the different barriers that we have and breaking those down through action. And I think within young people and younger generations as a whole, we tend to place ourselves into identity groups, and sometimes that can isolate us from really talking to other people, not just a matter of viewpoints, but also a matter of experience. And so we have people who are feminists, and it's really a matter of go talk to the people who aren't feminist, go talk to the people who are outside of this movement and see what they see. Look at those perspectives. And I think that once we start to break down the barriers of I'm this type of activist and I'm this type of activist, we can really start to understand how much our work is interconnected. And I think that when it comes to bringing out the youth vote, it's no one issue that will do that. It's not student debt alone. It's not the ERA alone. It's not climate change alone. It is so much, so many of these issues, they all have to come together. And I think that we have to reach those people. And to do that, we have to step outside of our comfort zones and our identities and talk to people who don't fit into those. And that can be really challenging, especially for a generation of people that can be really divided at times, but there is middle ground. And I think that looking for that and finding that and starting to really have more conversations with people who are different than us is one of the most important ways that we can understand what motivates others to vote, what motivates others to not vote. And it's not, we're limited as individuals in how we perceive voting and engagement. And so it has to be more of an inter-movement work. It has to go to the different movements, different identities, different perspectives, different demographics, to really get that full picture of what we need as young people to bring out the youth vote.
I was gonna also mention something that we've really tried to cultivate in our space as the Feminist Front is this idea of intergenerational organizing being very important and informing so much of our work. And so when we're talking about silos, we draw on Bell Hooks's work, and a lot of what she writes about is working across difference, right? And so that's kind of what Julia is talking about. So whether that be difference in lived experience, difference in political affiliation, whatever it is. And so something that the older folks we've been blessed to organize with has always told us is that, we don't have to necessarily reinvent the wheel as young people. Like if we humble ourselves to understand that perhaps we don't know everything and that there's actually a plethora of knowledge we have to gain from these folks in like trusted relationship, right? We're actually more powerful together. And so I think that requires a type of courage to mess up and understand that we have different language for talking about these issues, right? We have different levels of stakes. And that's okay though. And that's actually very motivational at the root of that. And also kind of around voting though, what I want to mention is that in regards to silos, a lot of time the narrative is talking about voting from like a national level, right? And so we also see the importance in reframing it to like the most granular, like local level, and how local elections, voting within your community can be so impactful, as opposed to like politicians, right? How can we also look at like ballot initiatives or like judge races and things like that also impact our community? And so just using these different types of tools, resources, and relationships to, create a more cohesive, unified front. And through that, I think we can be a lot more effective in the work we want to be doing.
Yeah, definitely. I liked what you said about working intergenerationally. Just because we're Gen Z for change doesn't mean we're only looking to work with Gen Z by any means. And something that I have found to be such a like beautiful, mutually beneficial relationship is the amount of knowledge and like wisdom we get from folks who have been in movements in the past and who have this experience, have this knowledge that they can share with us. And then we can also share with them, kind of like the new language of today's advocacy work. We do TikTok and social media trainings for older activists and advocacy groups so that they can get on the same networks and same platforms as young people, and we can all work together to achieve the goals that we've all been working towards for a long time now.
That's a great segue, Victoria, into my next question, which is around social media specifically. I think there are, folks are in it in varying levels. What would you all say are the best methods or best practices for trying to engage and mobilize around issues? Victoria, I'll let you start as the resident TikToker.
Yeah, definitely. So some things that we have found to be very successful is people, of course, they do enjoy learning on TikTok, and it can definitely be an educational tool. But where I have found it primarily useful is in movements. When people can really get behind something, they have a call to action. So we had experience in Texas. Right to Life had put up a anti-abortion whistleblower website, essentially, where you could report anyone for having or aiding and abetting an abortion. And so we saw that and we were like, wow, there's essentially bounties being placed on people's heads in Texas for getting abortions. We don't like that. Let's try to make this more difficult for them. So we took to TikTok and encouraged people to send in fake tips So that way the people reviewing the tips would not be able to differentiate the fake tips from the real tips, which effectively crashed their website. And while, that didn't necessarily affect policy, it did buy people a little bit more time, which I was really grateful for. So just the response alone that we saw from that movement was really, really incredible. And I encourage everyone to take, whatever call to action you have, whatever movements, to social media and TikTok, because it can be really useful.
Yeah, I think many of us were watching that happen and said, oh my God, this is amazing. Others recommendations on best practices or strategies that you've seen that work really well on social media around around outreach and issue organizing?
One thing that we love to do with the Ruth Project is we will share student speeches at school board meetings. So this is something that's really local, and especially when you're having young people who are in school still, getting to see students the exact same age as them, students just like those sitting next to them in class, going up in front of their school boards and saying, hey, this is wrong, this needs to change. That is something that has had a huge impact. We have had TikToks go viral by just sharing speeches. And so we're not telling people anything to do. We're not sending a message. All we are doing is sharing the speech, and that alone is really inspiring. So I think demonstrating that you don't have to be some kind of superhuman to make a difference in the movement, that is really powerful. And I think social media is exceptional at being able to share things to a huge audience of people. And then the other piece with social media is reeling in people about things they didn't know. And a great way to do that is just start with a basic fact, start with something that's shocking, start with something that is like, will make someone stop in their tracks. And so sometimes we'll see social media and it'll jump right into an issue, assuming that people already know what they're talking about. But I think it's really amazing how through social media, we can bring in people who have never heard of a topic before, but they're seeing it, they're listening to the issue, and they're like, oh my goodness, I need to be a part of this. And so inspiring people is really a tactic that we try to work with over social media. In terms of some other tactics that we love Instagram live streams. They're a great platform to talk about issues, talk about different topics. If it's a certain awareness month, we'll do several different Instagram lives to just talk. And just watching them, you can learn a lot from them. So that's one thing we like doing, because that can also reach a wide variety of people. In addition to informational posting is great, but like Victoria said, there really has to be a call to action. And especially if you're sending out information about something that's negative. So there's a certain court case, I know that's a very real example right now. If there's a certain Supreme Court case that comes out that is negative, instead of just sharing the negative news, it's okay, here's what's happening and here's what we need to do, here's the action. That is really what's going to make a difference in terms of getting people to get up and do something about it.
I would also add too, in regards to that, the importance as organizations for us to be in conversation with each other and being proactive around messaging and how we can really be cohesive and aligned. So whether that's through making joint statements, through signing off on each other's, campaign launches, like this is the time we're all going to drop the same graphic, or we're going to all make this one call to action, so that we have maximum reach, and that no matter how folks are getting kind of introduced into the movement, whether it's through our organization or a partner, there is cohesion there. And I think just that type of like collaborative spirit is also so important when we are talking about issues that are so huge and have such high stakes that we need to be highly organized in the messaging. Actually, it's a very intentional work.
Yeah, just to hop onto an earlier point that Julia mentioned about, you don't need to be a superhuman to make an impact on social media. I don't work on social media outreach directly with GR, but some best practices that I've seen are focused on timeliness and harnessing the energy that people are already bringing. You know, we were expecting like very early that the Roe decision would drop, but when the draft decision dropped, we were super surprised, but also like very prepared. We knew we wanted to jump on individual outreach because people were fired up, and you know, as a result, we got tons of people across the country to host walkouts at their middle and high schools within only a few days' time. So in terms of effectively organizing on social media, it's really important to be prepared and keep track of timeliness, and also just harness the energy that people already have, and anticipating how to approach potential future events. And I know also like super early on with GR, we had our own mini coalition of youth-led gender equality organizations. So utilizing our collaborative social media presence was super important as well.
Yeah, I think the call to action, I think so much of organizing overall is, what are you asking people to do? You're asking them to be outraged. So then what do they do with that rage? And I think that's something that translates across all platforms, both in real life and on social media. What are you asking people to do? You know, as we are the ERA coalition focused on the codification and implementation of the Equal Rights Amendment, how are you all messaging that to your younger audiences?
I think education coming first is super important. I think, I mean, this was a stat we talked about in a recent ER kind of like video spree, but I think it's like 80% of people don't know that the ERA isn't actually ratified. And especially with young people, they just really didn't know. And so I think education first, and then the call to action second is really important.
Roe is not dead, or not Roe, the ERA is not dead. That's like what we try and really lead with, is like, this is very much still a present conversation. It's not something of the 1970s. It's still very much here. And it's actually very, it's a victory we can see in our lifetime is really what we try and lead with regarding messaging for young folks. And why I said that earlier right now with Roe is that we are trying to tie the ERA to other very important fights and issues that young folks care about, to see like how all of these policies are actually very interconnected, and how we can leverage certain things to gain other victories in civil rights legislation. And so, yeah, I would say education, absolutely. And then always going back to how can we transform that education into meaningful action, whether that being talking to legislators, whether that mean doing teach-ins at your own school, which we were helping support too. And one of the last things we actually just hosted recently was an ERA Now art series, where we were literally supporting folks and paying folks of color to create these beautiful pieces of artwork that inform others through this visual language, that the ERA is still very much a fight that we are taking on right now. And so the many different issues that the ERA actually touches, and through kind of connecting those dots for people, really seeing that there is urgency in this fight.
Yeah, just piggybacking off of that, last year GR released about like 140-page policy proposal called the Feminist Framework, that was basically about like the vast extent that the ERA can have, the vast impact that it can have on people. And we included categories like reproductive justice, queer liberation, economic opportunity, criminal justice reform, just really like the vast extent of what the ERA can do. And, you know, we pushed out that messaging to young people, and the response we got was amazing, with just tons of people not knowing about this information before. And in each of these categories, we also had testimonials from our own organizers about how the ratification of the ERA would help them with their personal lives, as well as with the other intersectional policies that we often are advocating for, whether it be gun violence or protecting Indigenous women, getting equitable education. There are just tons of different intersectional points at which the ERA is impactful towards, and it's just so important to keep educating young people on the issue so that this conversation stays alive.
At the Ruth Project, a lot of our work is around Title IX. That is really our baby when it comes to action. And so I often joke around that Title IX is like a mini ERA, which in some senses it is. If you look at the language, it's remarkable how similar language is. So in some senses, we have our educational version of that. And when talking about the ERA, people are skeptical. Oh, this is my grandmother's movement. No. What we really try to convey is, okay, look at all of this stuff Title IX is, and this is just in schools. Now imagine that the entire country. And like Ritwik said, it does apply to so many areas. We have tried to communicate that through social media, the history, especially what's going on right now. It's confusing for a lot of people, what's going on, the states ratified it. And so really trying to explain that. But on an action side, what we always keep saying is, look how much Title IX has done for us. Sure, there's a lot more to go there, but Title IX has paved the way for sexual harassment support offices, which has been enormous in impact. We have been using that as one of our most important tools for advocacy. So we're training teenagers. Here are your rights. Here's how to advocate for them. If anyone in your school violates these rights, you advocate for them. And that's just Title IX. So we have this baby version of it, and it's already done so much. And so when looking at the ERA, it's a matter of this can be so much bigger. This can go so much further. But again, like Victoria said, it does have to start with education. Young people, the vast majority of young people don't know what the ERA is, or they have a lot of misconceptions about it. I still hear comments about the draft every time the ERA is mentioned. I still hear comments about gender neutral bathrooms every time the ERA is mentioned. And I think it's alleviating a lot of these issues and talking about them in a broader context that does apply to our everyday lives. And so at the Ruth Project, one of the things that we always look to do is follow Ruth Bader Ginsburg's legacy. And so we use her writings, we use some of her teachings to guide the work we do and to guide the philosophies behind some of that work. And she definitely made a very capable argument for the ERA. And when she makes her argument for the ERA in one of her books, she really talks about these negative points. So people talk about the draft, people talk about bathrooms, they talk about these, and these are really the anti-feminist points to attack it. And these are so minute and compared with how much of an impact the ERA would make, that it's a matter of breaking down these misconceptions about it, educating people, and then telling them what's going on and what they can do to act.
It's so true. It's so true. And education. So before I throw it open to our audience, so you audience members, you can start populating, pushing in your questions either into the chat if you're watching on Zoom, or I believe we have the capabilities to see comments on all of the platforms wherever you may be viewing. So think of your questions for this amazing panel before I ask this last question of the formal questions that I had. And so much of the organizing work is like, what are the deliverables? How do you measure whether or not what you're doing, particularly on social, is moving the needle? Is it I think sometimes folks get caught up in the number of views, the number of impressions, which is great, but how do we actually measure if we're moving hearts and minds or moving people to action?
Yeah, definitely. So obviously with good trouble type of movements, we can see that very quantifiably, how many people signed this petition, how many people sent a fake email or sent a fake tip, how many people called, how many people registered to vote. That type of stuff can be very quantifiable. And you can see very realistically the impact that you're making. But what means the most to me as a TikTok creator, kind of removed from Gen Z for change for a second, is when I talk to someone who has followed me for a long time and has hated me for a long time, really disagreed with my views and was kind of hate watching me. And one day they had this realization that they actually kind of agreed with some of the things that I was saying. And just like the thank you for like being so patient with me and thank you for teaching me, that just has meant the absolute world to me. So I would say that that's the biggest signifier of kind of like a victory for me.
How do you measure your impact?
I was just gonna say, yeah, I think it's kind of a stamina game. You have to understand that you can't be reactive to every post and be so obsessed with the numbers that you lose sight of kind of the larger picture. And so what we care about really is like the depth of involvement for our members, whether that's them continuing to work with us, whether that's through text banking, phone banking, showing up at events, hopping onto our lives and watching a panel that we're doing. That to us is really the type of like labor of love that we care about and what we imagine will sustain us into the future as these platforms continue to change, right? Because in another 10 years, who knows what we'll be looking like. And so what will sustain us, we believe, is the relationships and the depth of involvement between all of us as a community.
We similarly at the Ruth Project, we also really try to look at member engagement depth. And with social media, I do agree it is easy to get caught up in the numbers. They do, of course, provide insights, but the insights don't give you that much insight if you're just looking at the numbers. And so we like our website insights. We like to see how many people are going to our website, learning about our messaging, how many people are joining us, how many people are making an impact through some of the resources we put out. On the less social media side of things, one of the biggest ways that we do measure our impact is through policy change. How many policies have we changed? What is the extent to which we have changed them? And then we look at the mentorship piece. We are a very, very, very mentorship heavy organization. And so we look at how many people have we mentored, how these people benefit from it, and what are they doing next with what we've taught them.
Yeah, every time we have a huge spike in social media presence, like a viral post or tons of comments and reposts, we measure what that looks like by putting forth action items like, joining our organizing workspace or hosting a demonstration or lobbying legislators. And the energy that we get through these action items is the way that we quantify our social media presence. And I think this energy is just super important to keeping people motivated as well. And, continuing this kind of education path that we're taking with the ERA. And I think that is what makes social media really impactful.
I love that, and really appreciate the framing, because I think I'm a longtime political operative and strategist, and we always say like lawn signs don't vote. Like it's good to have them and in terms of bringing awareness, but at the end of the day, lawn signs don't vote. So just because there are eyes on a post or a post has gone viral doesn't mean that it has actually moved people to action. So how to measure the impact of your social media campaign is how are you moving people from online viewing to in-person action. And I think that is something that we really need to emphasize, because as folks are getting more familiar with the platforms, it's like, oh, well, this is great because it's had, umpteen million shares or umpteen million views, but what does it ask people to do? What has it compelled people to do? So thank you for that reminder for me, because often I get kind of caught up in like, oh, the statistics, but the statistics are great, but how does it translate into actual action? I have a question in the chat. How do we give people hope, particularly young people hope in times like these? I mean, these are, as I said earlier, these are some very dark days. I'm looking at some of the decisions that have been announced, just today from the Supreme Court that are, very concerning for folks who may not agree with the decisions coming out of the Supreme Court. But how do you give people hope in this moment?
In my experience, I feel like to a certain extent, busy hands are happy hands. Anytime I relay bad information through like a TikTok or a post, something like that, I get tons of responses that are like, okay, but what do we do about this? And so in response to terrible news, I think coming up with a way that people can help alleviate the pain in the situation gives people hope and makes people feel better. So like with Roe, for example, obviously there's not much we can do to stop the Supreme Court, but we can donate to abortion funds. And I think that just little action items like that really do give people a lot of hope.
I'll jump in. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead, Julia.
I just wanted to add to that question because it's a really great question. In terms of giving people hope, especially when bad news is coming out, one thing that I really believe is important is community building and emphasizing together, especially when a lot of these issues, our first reaction might be as individuals. And so the messaging that I always try to do within my organization when something bad comes out is, look, this is not something that we're facing as individuals. This is something we're facing as a community, and each of us is experiencing this, and each of us can uplift and come together. And I think that's the power of people.
I always come back to like one of my favorite quotes by Miriam Kaba, which is hope is a discipline. And so, you know, if we look at our organizing and being so disciplined in that, how can we also transfer that framework to actually hope as a concept, and more than that, as a practice, right? And so I think when, you know, dumpster fires of the world continue to burn, right? How do we sustain ourselves in the long term? Which I think is very valuable as young people for us to understand, that if we are to be in this struggle for a lifetime, we have to be very wise in how we sustain ourselves. So I think it does take a dose of self-awareness of knowing when you need to tap out, take care of yourself, turn off your phone, go outside, feel like the real earth beneath your feet and be grounded in that way. Take your moment and then know when you are able to shift gears and go back into an action space. But we cannot always be in this state of action. It is not sustainable. And yeah, just really thinking not just of the self, not just of the now, but for generations to come, just like all of our other like elder organizers have always taught us, is that these struggles will continue to go on. And I think that's just a very actually like humbling, mindful practice we can all engage in.
Okay, I needed to hear that because I know I go through plenty of days where I feel like I'm working till I'm dropping, but I feel like the world is on fire. I can't afford to sleep, but as they say on a plane, put your mask on first before you help others. So thank you for that reminder, which I think is a great segue to the next question of, for those who are watching, the young people that are watching, what is your advice to them to get involved and join the cause? How do they do that? What is the, do they just start following you all on social? Do they like what, or, do you have other strategies that you think are, in addition to following you all on social, of course, but what else should they be doing?
I can jump in. Yeah, so I think something that I wish I really did when I first started getting involved was, currently legislators are expecting a lot from young people, whether that means coming prepared to lobbying conversations, understanding the ins and outs of policy, or, being constantly underestimated. So, not to feed into that narrative, but I think as a young person, entering the organizing space, it's really important to, read about local policy, start talking to people on a grassroots level. And I think it's also a combination of like following organizations like ours on social media and seeing, the work that we currently do and how you can get involved locally. And again, it doesn't take a superhuman to get involved. And I really, really encourage everyone to, follow all of our organizations on social media. Everyone's doing really important work.
Yeah, I would just completely echo what you said. Obviously would love a follow, like follow us. I think that, we put out great content, but getting involved locally in your community is super, super important. There are tons of grassroots efforts. If you're in high school, there are going to be clubs or different opportunities for you to get involved in your community, and also like get kids registered to vote at your high school. There's so many different ways to get involved locally. Definitely keep your eye out for those opportunities.
We do
Do
a
things
lot.
with your friends. Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Oh, do you want to go?
Yeah, I mean, just a 1-second pitch is just like, do things with your friends. It is so scary to do things on your own sometimes, especially when you're really young and you're feeling very new to a space. And most of the time, we almost always feel braver when we're in the company of loved ones. So I can't overemphasize that enough, is that if you probably care about something and you want to join something, you're probably not the only one in your classroom or your neighborhood that's also having the same thought. And sometimes it's just as small as like, making an invitation with like, hey, would you want to be interested in coming to this, call with me? I think it could be really cool for us to join. I think it's effective.
Yes, I completely agree. The Ruth Project, we're really big into grassroots work, on the ground, action all the time. And so a lot of our work with high school students is, okay, you want to make a difference? All right, we'll teach you how. We were just training someone as young as 13 years old how to write legal arguments against gender discrimination. And so it's really a matter of, you want to make a difference? All right, come on board. We're going to make that happen. And so a lot of our work with initiative building, supporting sexual harassment survivors through Title IX office improvements, dress code reform, those are our on the ground action work. But I'm a big believer in multimedia advocacy, and not just signing petitions and not just lobbying and signing petitions and protesting, but there's also art, there's graphic design, there's writing. And so something that we're really big into with the Ruth Project is bringing in people, looking at what they love doing, what are the things they enjoy, what are the things they're good at, and finding a place for them in our organization where they can express that.
It's amazing. We've covered so much, and I can't believe we're almost at time. But quickly, is there any last thought that you want to leave with our audience? Any marching orders or things to think about for our audience that you want to share?
I think before maybe we do any type of larger organizational organizing, like with people we don't know, we should start small with our homes, our family units, our neighborhoods. What are the actual really critical conversations we can be having one-to-one with the people we already are in space with, and start there, specifically with the young people in our lives.
Love that. Start at home. Others? Any closing thoughts?
I'll go ahead.
Go ahead.
My closing thoughts with young people is, I really love what Victoria said earlier, is that a lot of cynicism that we may feel is valid. We've seen all kinds of crazy things happen from really young ages, and really internalizing a lot of that. And so I think that in reaching young people and talking to young people is really a matter of conveying empathy, love, and community. And I think that those transcends the border of different niche groups or identities or whatever, is showing just common empathy, love, and community building. And when you start with that, you start with those personal connections, which will really bring people up and empower them and motivate them to be the ones making a difference, but then also sometimes to be the ones supporting those who are making a difference. And to understand that not everyone has to charge headfirst into the movement, but people can make smaller actions that are more compatible with their lifestyles. Voting is number one on my list, but education is absolutely crucial. And so I think that just a common acceptance and empathy from different generations, more talking with each other from different identities, is what starts the path forward to working together and building stronger voter blocs that can alleviate a lot of issues of policy inequity and really start building a better future.
Love it, love it, love it. Well, looking at the time, I want to invite back our president and CEO, Zakiya Thomas, to close us out.
Well, thank you so much for our panelists and for Kimberly for hosting tonight's conversation. We also want to thank you for joining us this evening. We have a recap, we'll have a recap blog post with the additional resources mentioned today on our website, as well as the full video recording and the links to each of their organizations. But also, if you want to check out the chat, you can see that each of them have put in their organization's contact info. So please follow them, uplift them, support them, because they're doing the good work and we want to magnify that. As we continue to work toward a more equal future, please make sure you continue to join us here for the future Harnish Town Hall discussions. And of course, our new campaign page, Elect Equality, that's electequality.org. You can find your local candidates for office this year, federal candidates for office this year, and you can make sure they support the ERA and equality before you go to the polls. So again, thank you everyone, and we'll see you next time.